Okay, so we're continuing on in our study of Revelation chapter 6. And in our last study, we were introduced to a character who appears at the opening of the first seal. The rider on the white horse, the code name Conquest we gave him. And we concluded that this rider is indeed the Antichrist, who will arrive on the scene to give the world a sense of peace. So if he's showing up offering peace, what can we conclude from that? Well, that the world is not at peace when he arrives. Otherwise, his arrival in such a manner is pointless. It can be easy for us to assume, while we look at this situation on paper, that since we as believers aren't going to endure the tribulation period, we can assume that everything is all hunky-dory for us leading up to the rapture. But that is not necessarily the case. We don't know precisely when the rapture will occur, nor how long after the rapture occurs until the Antichrist will arrive. Most people assume right after, and I tend to agree with that assumption. But we only know that when he does arrive, he will be offering peace, which tells us that there is not peace, quote unquote, currently. And as I mentioned last time, in that Matthew 24 parallels these first several judgments in Revelation chapter 6. But I also mentioned how Jesus was talking about how this was basically a sign of the times. In Matthew 24, he's answering his disciples' questions. What will the sign of your coming be and of the end of the age? And Jesus responds by giving them warning signs of what the world will be like before he returns. Now we know that his second coming will take place after the 7-year tribulation. And we know that the tribulation doesn't begin until after the rapture. But we do not know how long before his second coming that these signs of the times will begin. And I will suggest, and most scholars would agree with me, that they have already begun and have been going on for some time now. But how intense will they become before Christ removes his church? We do not know the answer to that question. Jesus in Matthew 24:8 likens these signs to birth pangs, as does the Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And what is meant by this analogy? Well, just like with labor pains, these signs will progress slowly. They will become more and more frequent, as well as more and more intense, just like birth pains. Look at the words of Jesus in Matthew 24, starting in verse 4. And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceive you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Verse 7. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. Verse 8. And all these are the beginning of sorrows. Now, verse 8 in the New Living Translation reads like this, but all this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come. So anyway, moving on to verse 9. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, and will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and will deceive many. So he's giving a prophetic overview of what the times will be like in general, but also inferring that just as with birth pains, all these signs will eventually come to fruition. He says in verse 5, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ. He's talking about false religions, perverted gospel messages, false beliefs and ideas, false teachers, and even imposters will all be on the rise. Vast deception in general. I mean, think of all the lies we have in our churches even today. And the culmination of all of this, the result or the birth, if you will, of it, will be the Antichrist. And that will happen with the opening of the first seal, the rider on the white horse. So he goes on in Matthew 24, verse 6, he goes on to say, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." Now we know that this has been going on lately, a lot of this, and it will come to fruition with the appearance of the rider on the next horse in Revelation 6:4. But it goes on in Matthew 24, verse 7 goes on to say, "And there will be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places." These are all things that we see on the rise in the world today too. And the culmination of all these things will be found in Revelation 6, Revelation 6:6, Revelation 6:8, and in Revelation 6:12. So the intensity of the tribulation period is not going to involve believers. But there is no guarantee that we won't feel some of these labor pains, even to a very severe degree, in fact. So Matthew 24:12 reads, "And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold." And the NLT, the New Living Translation version of that same verse, says, "Sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will grow cold." Now, that verse could very well be speaking about the general condition of mankind even before the rapture. And I truly believe that that is the case. We're close even now. But as we've stated, when Antichrist comes onto the scene, which is what kicks off the 7-year tribulation period, he's offering peace, which clearly indicates that peace is desired and needed. I mentioned the war of Ezekiel 38 and 39 in our previous study, and said that at some time in the future from now, an alliance of nations will surround the nation of Israel and will incite what will most likely be labeled World War III. Now, what we don't know this for sure, but I'm going to suggest that this more than likely will occur sometime just before or immediately after the rapture. And I say this mainly because the indication here is that the world is desperate for peace when the Antichrist arrives. So when we ended our last study, the hero, the rider on the white horse in Revelation 6:2, had just shown up. This is the Antichrist. And for essentially the first time ever, all the nations of the world seem to be at peace with one another, and nobody's on edge any longer. The rapture has more than likely been explained away, and folks are probably not even talking about it anymore. Those headlines have been replaced with the talk of this wonderful newfound world peace. So, that's our first rider. Let's get on to Revelation chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. It reads, "When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, 'Come and see.' Another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword." Again, who is opening this seal? What's the Lamb? The Lamb is Jesus. He's the one in charge here. Never forget that. In our previous study, we talked about what the living creature is saying, and that the phrase "come and see" is actually not a very good translation here in the New King James. But the translations that read "go forth" or "come forth" or "go" are actually much better wordings. And the reason I say that is because the words here are not being directed towards John. The cherub is actually addressing the rider on the horse and saying to him, "Hey, you've got a job to do, and now it's time to go out and do it." Okay, so right now this is just a fair warning. Our study from here on out is about to morph from PG-13 into rated R. So just so we're all aware of this, it's going to get a little gory here. Now, John sees this second horse. This one is fiery red. And of course, there's some symbolisms in this. First of all, a rider on a horse in the Bible is a symbol of conquest, of war, and of judgment. And in this case, the case of the first four seal judgments, in which we see what we've called the four horsemen of the apocalypse, these are all symbolic of judgment. And specifically with this second seal, it's symbolic of war and judgment. And these horses here are the Lord's war machines. They go out to do the Lord's bidding. They are not rogue characters in all this, out causing mayhem all on their own. And although these horses are not in and of themselves symbolic of anything good, they are what God is using to accomplish his will. He is still the one in charge. They are just a means to an end for his purpose. So let's look at Revelation chapter 19, verse 11 and the first part of verse 12. And we looked at this passage in our last study. But look at how the text describes the Lord here in his second coming. It says, "Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire." Our Lord comes on a horse. And what does he do? The verse says he judges and wages war. And what does verse 12 mention about his eyes? Well, they're like a flame of fire. Other translations say a blazing fire. And we've mentioned this several times in our study of the book of Revelation, that fire is symbolic of judgment, especially when describing the eyes specifically. This is a symbol of a piercing, judgmental gaze. So looking at the words in chapter 6, verse 4, how is the color of the second horse described? Well, some translations say red. Some say bright red. But the better translations read fiery red or red like fire. Now, fire is symbolic of judgment, but also the color red is always symbolic of war and bloodshed. So this is a symbol of bloody, judgmental warfare. In our previous study, I had given each of the four horsemen code names in order to help us remember what each rider's purpose is in all of this. So our first rider, which is the Antichrist, we gave him the code name Conquest. And he comes with a bow and no arrows. This is a bloodless conquering. That's what that's a picture of. This rider that we're looking at here is the rider on the red horse. We called him Slaughter. And he's carrying a great sword. And this is a symbol of bloody mayhem. The next rider we're going to see is the rider on the black horse. When we give him the code name Dearth, he carries a pair of scales. And this is a picture of rationings and famine. And then the final rider, the fourth rider on the fourth horse, the ashen or the pale horse, we call him Death. And that is just what it sounds like. So this second horseman here in 6:4 is Slaughter. The opening of the second seal unleashes upon the earth a degree of bloodshed and civil unrest that is quite unimaginable. And we can gather that idea just from the symbols given that it's a fiery red horse alone. But look at what we see about the rider who's on this horse also. It says it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth. The Greek word being translated take here literally means to seize and remove, or to grasp and carry away. God is literally going to snatch all peace away from the planet. Nobody will have any sense of peace at all. Before this, people on the earth are going to be like on cloud 9, not a care in the world, no reason to worry about anything. Just as Jesus indicated in Luke 17:26 through 30. Remember, we looked at this passage before. Jesus was comparing the demeanor of the people with those in the days of Noah and in the days of Lot. He says that they will be eating and drinking, they will be marrying, they will be planting and building and selling and buying. In other words, life as usual, not a clue that anything could possibly go wrong. I mean, think of how the United States was just 1 minute before that first plane flew into the Twin Towers, or the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor. You know, sometimes we can get a little too comfortable with the status quo in our lives, and then bam, folks on the earth are going to be convinced that there's nothing to fear. In 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 2 and 3, Paul writes, "For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape." So as quickly as you can snap your fingers, God will allow this second rider to snatch peace from the earth. I mean, think about that for a moment. This isn't just referring to peace between nations, though it certainly does include that, but even more so, any sense of peace, including peace of mind or inner peace, all sense of personal security and tranquility, gone. Remember when we did our introduction into Revelation chapter 6, we talked about how anxiety and depression can often be some of the worst sensations that humans can experience. And why is that? Well, it's because it's a condition of the mind. It's our own consciousness causing us to believe that everyone and everything is out to get us and to steal our inner peace. I mean, can you imagine the panic and the paranoia and the level of anxiety when God literally removes peace from the world? A constant sense of feeling like you need to be looking over your shoulders. Only now, during this particular time period, that sense will actually be warranted. It won't just be paranoia. It will be like, it's really going to happen, so I better be looking. Because all this removal of peace from the earth does also include peace one with another. Because look at what else it says about this rider on the red horse. Not only is he allowed to take away peace, but it also says that people should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. And the word translated kill in this verse literally means to slaughter or to kill in a violent manner or to mortally wound. This is not going to merely be country against country, East versus West, but also religion against religion, neighbor versus neighbor, ethnic group against ethnic group, political party versus political party. We're seeing that run rampant right now. Any two people groups that are normally at odds with one another will still be at odds with one another. Only now it's not just bickering, but it's physical bludgeoning. Verse 4 ends with the words, "There was given to him a great sword." Now, some translations read a large sword, but that is actually not an accurate translation. The word translated great here is the word megas, which literally means mighty or great. It does not mean large. This word is not referring to the same type of sword as the one described when we see our Lord. When he comes, we see him with the sword of his mouth, which is described as a large sword. That is a rhamphia, which would be like a saber or a scimitar. The word described here is a smaller weapon. It's the word machaira, which is more like a dagger or maybe even a machete. Used specifically in hand-to-hand or face-to-face combat. When you attack someone with this, it's up close and personal, and it's brutal. This is a type of knife a hunter might use to kill or to field dress his kill, similar to what a butcher might use when he's preparing a cut of meat, or what the Old Testament priests would use to kill the sacrificial animals at the altar. I mean, this thing is a fantastic tool, but it makes for an extremely ugly weapon. The point is that this is clearly speaking about close-range murder, and not just unrest among nations, but this is carnage and anarchy. Peace has literally been replaced by the sword, by violence. Issues that used to lead to hurt feelings and people giving one another the cold shoulder now will end in bloodshed and murder.